Does the observer dictate the narrative? Or does the narrative entrap the observer? We typically regard a text as a static transmission of data, an immutable bridge between the author's intent and the reader's intellect. But the artifact on the examination table challenges this fundamental axiom of communication. Before us lies the Tome of Shifting Sands, the sole recovered literary device from the buried libraries of the Xerophilus Basin. It is a book that seemingly refuses to be written. Let us break the seal on the containment unit and document what remains. Initial visual inspection under broad-spectrum halogen reveals that the object does not conform to standard codex morphology. The binding, if we can apply such a terrestrial term, is constructed from a calcified organic polymer, likely derived from the carapace of a native megafauna species, now extinct. Note the heavy oxidation along the spine. The greenish patina suggests the presence of copper salts in the tanning process, or perhaps an environmental reaction to the atmospheric toxins present during the excavation. The artifact is heavy, possessing a density that belies its dimensions. It is cold to the touch, a thermal sink that absorbs the ambient heat of the laboratory, registering a consistent 12 degrees below room temperature. Reference plate 1A displays the internal mechanism. There are no paper pages here. There is no parchment, no vellum, no plant fiber derivative. Instead, the tome consists of 24 distinct panes of transparent, high-tensile silicate glass, roughly 3 mm thick. These panes are hermetically sealed at the edges with a resin that has defied spectrographic dating. Between these glass layers lies the defining anomaly of the artifact, a suspension medium. It appears to be a viscous, clear oil, within which millions of microscopic particulates are suspended. Under 50x magnification, these particulates are revealed not as ink, but as distinct, crystalline grains of ferrous sand. They are roughly uniform in size, suggesting they were not gathered from a dune, but manufactured. They are artificial microstructures. When the tome is at rest, as it is now on the pedestal, the pages appear blank, merely gray, cloudy windows into a chaotic fog of dust. However, observe what occurs when we introduce a low-level bioelectric charge, simulating the touch of a hand. If you focus your attention on the center of the first pane, the chaos begins to organize. The ferrous grains migrate. They align along magnetic field lines that seem to originate from within the glass itself. Slowly, sluggishly, the dust coalesces into sharp, angular geometries. These are glyphs. The text is not printed on the page. The text is formed by the temporary arrangement of the page's own molecular structure. The excavation context provides a grim clarification of this mechanism. This object was recovered from stratum IV of the Silent City, a settlement preserved under a layer of vitrified ash. The surrounding structures indicated a society deeply invested in philosophy and solipsism. The library where this tome was found contained thousands of similar volumes, but most had shattered due to the thermal shock of the cataclysm. This unit survived only because it was housed in a lead-lined dampening field, likely a restricted section intended for high-clearance scholars. I find the implications of this physical structure unsettling. In our history, we view the written word as a method of preservation, a way to immortalize a thought against the erosion of time. We carve into stone, we stain paper. We seek permanence. The creators of this tome sought the opposite. They engineered a medium where the text is transient, existing only as long as the energy is applied. Once the connection is severed, the grains disperse, returning to entropy. It suggests a culture that did not value history as a fixed point, but rather viewed truth as a fluid state, dependent entirely on the presence of a witness. We must also consider the craftsmanship required to suspend iron in a non-Newtonian fluid that prevents clumping over millennia. The metallurgy of the microscopic grains shows trace elements of cobalt and neodymium, rare earth magnets that allow for rapid, crisp reorientation. This was not a primitive toy, it was the pinnacle of their material science. As we prepare to engage with the syntax itself in the next phase of analysis, we must acknowledge the physical fragility of the knowledge contained here. If I were to shake this canister violently, the history of a civilization would dissolve into a meaningless gray sludge. It is a terrifying fragility. The text is literally held together by tension, moving beyond the surface stratigraphy. we encounter the true anomaly of the Tome of Shifting Sands, its functional syntax. Standard archaeological protocol dictates that to understand a text, one must first identify the alphabet, then the grammar, and finally the meaning. However, in attempting to catalog the contents of reference plate 4, the central pane of the artifact, we have discovered that the text possesses a reactive quality that defies standard linguistic categorization. We initially hypothesized that the bioelectric charge mentioned in the previous section was the sole trigger for the ferrous suspension. This was an error. Further experimentation, utilizing high-speed macro photography and variable subject testing, indicates a secondary, far more sophisticated mechanism. Embedded within the calcified rim of the book are microscopic sensors, primitive but highly effective photoreceptors. These sensors do not track light, they track the retinal. The book knows where you are looking. When a subject focuses on the upper quadrant of the pane, the ferrous grains do not simply settle into a static paragraph. They vibrate. They enter a state of flux. As the eye scans left to right, the grains anticipate the saccadic movement of the pupil, arranging themselves into glyphs microseconds before the gaze lands upon them. The text is being constructed in real time, just ahead of the reader's perception. I find this mechanical subservience deeply troubling. A conventional book is an assertive object. It states its contents regardless of the reader's desire. This tome is submissive. It asks, biologically and subconsciously, what the reader expects to find, and then it provides it. To illustrate this recursive syntax, consider the translation logs from Experiment 7 Beta. We placed two linguistic specialists, separated by a partition, in front of the same pane of glass. Subject A, a specialist in agrarian poetry, was asked to transcribe the glyphs. Subject B, a historian of military tactics, was asked to do the same. Subject A reported a lyrical, flowing script describing the life cycle of a desert flower, a metaphor for resilience. He translated phrases such as, the root that drinks the dry earth, and, the blossom that defies the sun. Simultaneously, looking at the exact same arrangement of suspended iron, Subject B transcribed a rigid, staccato manifest on siege warfare, where Subject A saw roots. Subject B saw trenches, where Subject A saw blossoms. Subject B saw impact craters. We are not dealing with a simple case of homonyms or poetic ambiguity. We are observing a phenomenon I have classified as quantum semantics. The glyphs themselves are physically altering their shape to match the cognitive bias of the observer. The tome utilizes a recursive feedback loop. It reads the micro-expressions and pupil dilation of the user to determine their emotional state and intellectual predisposition, then calculates the most satisfying narrative path, rearranging the ferrous grains to confirm the user's worldview. This raises a formidable barrier to translation. How does one catalog a history that changes to suit the historian? If I approach this object with the hypothesis that the culture of the Silent City was peaceful, the book will show me hymns and treaties. If I approach it with a suspicion of their barbarism, it will show me execution logs. The artifact is a mirror, masquerading as a window. We have, however, managed to isolate a structural constant, a grammatical backbone that remains rigid regardless of the shifting vocabulary. Linguists call this recursive syntax. In standard English, the subject acts upon the object, e.g., the man reads the book. In the grammar of the tome, the relationship is circular. The syntax implies that the object creates the subject. A more accurate translation of the reading process would be, the book writes the man. Under high magnification analysis of the ferrous strokes, we see this philosophy enacted in the topography itself. The serifs of the glyphs are fractal. They spiral inward, drawing the eye toward the center of the word, locking the gaze. It is a trap. The act of reading this tome is physically addictive because it offers the ultimate intellectual narcotic, total validation. It never challenges the reader. It never presents an uncomfortable truth. It offers a perfect, frictionless echo of the reader's own mind. I shudder to think of the societal function of such a device. We assume books are tools for education, for the transfer of foreign ideas into a mind that lacks them. But this is an instrument of isolation. If a society relied on this technology for its news, its history, and its science, no two citizens would ever inhabit the same reality. They would look at the same page and see two different worlds, each perfectly tailored to their own prejudices. The mechanical sophistication required to achieve this is staggering. The sensors in the rim are not electronic in the modern sense, they are biological analogs. Grown from silicon-based proteins. They have not decayed because they were never truly alive. Yet they mimic the function of the optic nerve with terrifying precision. They are waiting for input. Even now, as I record this, I must avert my gaze from the central pane. I can see the grains twitching in my peripheral vision, yearning to form words that will please me. It is a siren song of confirmation bias, etched in iron dust. This technological narcissism offers the only plausible explanation for the anomalous nature of the collapse in Sector 7. The excavation of the Silent City presented a mystery that stumped initial field teams. There were no signs of panic. The stratigraphy of the destruction layer indicates a slow-moving, tectonic catastrophe, a gradual venting of toxic subterranean gases followed by a pyroclastic flow. It was an event that would have provided hours, perhaps days, of warning. A civilization capable of manufacturing recursive silicate sensors should have easily evacuated. Yet, the demographic scan shows 98% of the population remained in their domiciles. We found them seated, we found them in reclining postures, and in the skeletal grip of nearly every recovery subject. We found a tome similar to this one. We must conclude that the society did not die from a lack of intelligence, they died from a lack of shared reality. When a civilization adopts a medium that privileges the individual's internal narrative over external truth, the consensus reality, the agreed-upon set of facts that allows a society to function, evaporates. How does one organize an evacuation when half the population reads the smoke as a harmless atmospheric anomaly, and the other half reads it as a divine ascension, tailored specifically to their theological preferences? The Tome of Shifting Sands effectively severed the connective tissue between human beings. Why endure the friction of conversation, where one might be misunderstood, challenged, or offended, when one could commune with a sheet of glass that always agreed? The archaeological record shows a complete cessation of public art and communal architecture in the final 50 years of the stratum. The forums were empty. The marketplaces were silent. They had retreated into the perfect, customized echo chambers of their books. They starved in the grip of their own perfected narratives. It is a form of collective suicide by solipsism. The tragedy is that the censors in these books likely continued to function even as the ash buried the readers. The text would have shifted one final time, perhaps offering a soothing, poetic description of the heat, turning their incineration into a personalized literary climax. They died reading exactly what they wanted to hear. Wind down. I am concluding the analysis and severing the bioelectric feed. The ferrous grains are losing their cohesion, drifting back into the gray entropy of the suspension fluid. The text is gone. We will recommend that this artifact be moved to the deep storage vault in the exclusion wing. It is not a weapon of war, but it is a contagion. It carries the potential to dismantle the fundamental agreement that constitutes a culture. We are, perhaps, too close to this precipice in our own era to treat this object with anything less than terrified respect. We must remember that truth is often abrasive, cold, and indifferent to our desires. Anything that feels this comfortable is not a record of history, it is a cage.